Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In today's episode, we're taking on a potentially touchy subject, obedience and free will. In some, including myself, these words might trigger resistance or rebellion. However, what if we approach these concepts as alignment rather than submission? If we instead think of it as musicians in an orchestra who all agree to play in the same key. This is a form of obedience that enables co-creation rather than limiting it. So, in this episode, we are exploring how our capacity to freely choose alignment with life's greater patterns creates what Michael calls focused freedom. So join us, and together we will examine how this tension between individual sovereignty and alignment with greater purpose plays out in our personal growth, spiritual practice, and even within our social structures, all while respecting the fundamental principle that there is truly no obligation to obey. And we hope you enjoy the episode. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Now back to the podcast and obedience and free will. In continuing for this episode, we're going to continue with some light subjects, something called obedience and free will. And, to look at this, that can be a very touchy subject for a lot of people, myself included. But I think if you just take obedience and look at it as alignment rather than submission, and for me, the most apt sort of way to think about it is, when you're in an orchestra and you sit down to play a piece of music, you all agree to play in the same key, and that's a form of obedience. And if you can kind of move around the semantics of it, you realize, it's almost an invitation to co-create than it is, in order to go dig a hole,
I like that word invitation because the verb to invite. Life is inviting us to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, life is saying, hey, you're part of me. I'm part of your life because you're part of my life. We together are life. Therefore, come on in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to play? And you actually have to say yes. You can't be coerced.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what you're talking about, the tension, the classic, don't tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the parent may say, look, you obey what I say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in charge in this household.
Yeah.
And those tensions come up because at the deepest level, it isn't just the rebellious child says, who are you to tell me what to do, even though you're my father or you're my mother or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Deep
in the core of our being is imprinted freedom. Now, if we're going to go occult technology for a moment, it's said in the Ageless Wisdom teaching, at the heart of every atom in this solar system is the light of the Lord of Sirius, the Son of Sirius. And Sirius is a star of freedom. There is this phrase called the Syrian law of freedom, which basically says evolution in this solar system happens from the inside out spontaneously by choice. You cannot force another to grow. You can invite. And then later on, we'll explore what does it mean if you refuse the invitation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is a really interesting thing because it's not just about rebelling against authority.
Mm-hmm.
This is about freedom is at the heart of creation.
I think a good point there is, and this came up for me in my reading and the research, is that what is the freedom from? When we talk about freedom, it's because Agni Yoga teaches this emphasis on fiery freedom, but it's freedom from what?
It can be freedom from, and we can look at that, and it could be the freedom, which is the opportunity to do something. The freedom
Right.
to do. Now, freedom from, I go back to the Buddha,
Mhm.
freedom from attachment,
Mhm.
freedom from addiction,
Mhm.
Freedom means that there's nothing pulling on us that is not part of our essential nature.
Mhm.
So what is calling me as life and what is responding to life is the cleanest version of me that I can produce.
Mhm. Yeah.
Therefore, it's a clean response.
Mhm.
Um, this is the big one
Yeah.
because we see it playing out in society. We see it playing out all over the world
Mhm.
of are you loyal?
Mhm.
Can I rely on your loyalty? Will you recite the Pledge of Allegiance? Will you swear this oath to this belief system, even this person?
Mhm.
And that's what I'd like to explore. And we're going to be using the compilation Ponder on This again, Joey.
Mhm.
And for those of you who have not heard this podcast before, it's a compilation of the writings of Alice Bailey, who actually wrote down through at a distance dictation the teachings of a Tibetan Lama called the Master DK, the Tibetan. And it's part of the lineage that runs through Meditation Mount. So that's why we draw upon it, not as gospel, but as a starting point for exploration. So is there anything else we want to sort of look at before we dive into the text? And I know that the text will open a lot of doors
Mhm.
and we'll be able to explore many areas. But is there anything that you think, let's talk about this before we go into the material?
Well, maybe just setting up that we're semantically, these words can be very, I don't know, they can be a trigger for a lot of people. And and I think if you just try to hold these contexts as one, it's an invitation to dance in some ways.
Right.
Like in contemplating this stuff, I was thinking about because we're going to touch on free will. Um, it's like a phrase I've been thinking about, like is sort of episodic predeterminism. So they're going to put a record on, and you can dance to it any way you want. So the record's playing, so that's chosen. You can't. It's we just went through a Scorpio moon. You don't get to choose that. That's the record that's playing, but you get to dance to it however you want. And so if we just kind of maybe think about it in those terms instead of just the heavy-handedness sometimes of the words, um, we can sort of feel into it a little easier.
I think we're getting closer to this distinction. Obedience isn't, I will tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Obedience is an invitation to say yes to the truth that lives inside of you that has not yet revealed itself to you, and it's being called out of you
Mm-hmm.
by the you that is a greater manifestation of yourself. And you are, if you like, the microcosm of the macro. We've used this term before, that we're a fractal of the one life. So it's the one life calling to its many parts that are somehow forgotten they're part of the one and calling them back home. It's a homing signal.
Mm-hmm.
It's an invitation to come on home or to be part of the revelation of this great mystery of life. Now, obedience is very different when you say, I demand your obedience.
Yeah, it's the difference between the Inquisition and the invitation.
Absolutely.
So the Inquisition was very much a force in sort of the exact opposite of what we're talking about. It was demanded obedience, and you give up your free will, you give up your
Right.
autonomy, your agency, even to sort of think about these types of things.
Yes, and you were not considered as a sovereign self.
Mm-hmm.
You were considered as an element that had to show their allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the witch trials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were told you were evil because you did this or that, and therefore you'll be burnt at the stake if you don't repent, or if you don't, or even if you repented, you probably end up burning it because
Yeah.
that was the nature of the witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the imposition of our power over another person to force their will into submission.
Mm-hmm.
And will is not to be used to force anything to happen. It is a force.
Mm-hmm.
But will is the call of the purpose of life to be revealed. Now, how that plays out in the human instrument
Mm-hmm.
is what we're experimenting with. And we see certain countries where the governments are more dictatorial than others, but all of them require allegiance to, if you like, that national identity, the national agenda, or if a new government's come in, the particular political agenda that now accompanies the new person in power, rather than there's a deeper eternal truth that you're obeying, which is the call of life, the call of the soul, the call of the truth of who you are. And I guess that's what we're going to be looking at through the words of the Master DK. So this is section 125 from Ponder on This. It's called Obedience. And I love the way it starts out, Joey. So here's the first sentence on obedience. There is no obligation to obey.
That's why I was trying to soften this a little bit, so it's just in case people didn't hear the title and then turn it off. Like there's more to the story.
Yeah. So there is no obligation to obey. We would be the guides of the planet, the masters of wisdom, the postgraduate humans, our elder sisters and brother, whatever terminology. We seek to train intelligent servers of humanity. And these are developed by self-initiated effort, freedom in action and discrimination in method, and not by unquestioning obedience, negative acquiescence, and blind following. I mean, he just laid it out right there. Hey, hands off.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's so key to me, to my understanding too, because they're not asking you not to be you. I mean, you can play a discordant chord, if it moves the piece forward,
And I remember when I was playing piano, if I would play a discordant chord or what was then called a mistake, I would repeat it twice.
Yeah, that's jazz.
And then you realize it's a launch pad for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this opening statement it just lays it out clearly. Here are the guidelines. Look, we're not asking. Nobody's asking you to obey, blind obedience.
Right.
It's an invitation to be part of life.
Yeah.
So,
but it is like in the orchestra context, it is. You're welcome to play whatever you want, but if you want to play with us on this piece, we're going to play in A minor.
And the piece is already being played by the Lord of creation. This is the music that brought creation into being. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the symphonic score.
Right. And if you really follow that to its logical end, we're not actually creating anything new. We're remembering everything that already is.
But what we are creating, what the newness is, that we are now remembering more acutely, more aware, with more awareness, what was before the imprint.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is in the moment.
Yeah.
It is new. Because it's been born anew because we have a new awareness. We're seeing it through new eyes. That's the beauty of being part of this great symphony. You're not just playing the same old thing every day.
Yeah.
Remember, it's a spiral journey. And a symphony, when it spirals, expands and increases in its beauty and its depth with every movement. So after that first sentence, DK said, let this not be forgotten. He's basically saying, look, always come back to this. Then he says, if any command may ever emanate from the subjective band of teachers who I am a humble member, let it be to follow the dictates of your own soul and the promptings of your higher self. Like he said, if anyone's giving any orders, it's going to be your higher self. So train yourself to listen to that voice. And then it's up to you whether you obey yourself as a representative of the one life.
Yeah, because I find it interesting that it's printed in the Lucius Trust, because here's, it's based on someone who followed his own soul purpose in the revealing of some mysteries, so.
Yes. But what we're revealing is the eternal mysteries. It isn't, DK's not saying, I'm going to show you my version.
Right.
He's saying, this is my understanding of how we tread the path to revelation. So we have access and we enter into the one mystery. And then we begin to know it. And we know it for the first time, even though it may already have been imprinted, even though we may already have been carrying the musical score, the sheets of music inside of us. This is the first time we've played it with this level of consciousness and played it together. So this is a very powerful opener. And then he goes on to explain how you and I and others who have said yes to life are encouraged and developed. In the training of the Occidental student, that means the student from the West, blind, unquestioning obedience is never asked. Suggestions are made as to method and as to a technique which has proved effective for thousands of years and with many disciples. So the teachings of the East have been around for thousands of years, and they're just transferring that wisdom into the West. But it's not a thou shalt. It's like, here's some wisdom that's been tested over time. Some rules as to breathing, as to helpful process, and as to practical living on the physical plane will be imparted. But in the training of the new type of disciple during the coming age, it is the will of the watching gurus and rishis that they be left freer than has heretofore been the case. So we're being given greater freedom.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that servers and seekers and disciples before were imprisoned. There was and we're going to find out why it shifted now. But for me, this is the hallmark of where we're at now. We're being given greater freedom to discover for ourselves rather than being told by a teacher. But we can be encouraged and guided along the way so it's easier to find the signs and read the signs. This may mean a slightly slower development at the beginning, but will result, it is hoped, in a more rapid unfoldment during the later stages upon the path of initiation. So we may stumble and bumble along for the first part because we're not being told, go left, go right, watch that, mind your head. We find that by bumping into stuff and getting lost. So it takes time, but what we're growing is an ability to navigate.
Yeah.
Next paragraph. Therefore, students are urged to go forward during their period of training with courage and with joy, knowing that they are members of a band of disciples, knowing that they are not alone, but that the strength of the band is theirs. The knowledge of the band is theirs too, as they develop capacity to apprehend it. And knowing also that the love and wisdom and understanding of the watching elders are behind every aspiring child of God, even though they apparently, and then in quotes, or in parentheses, and wisely, are left to struggle through to the light in the strength of their own omnipotent soul. So this is what it says. We're left to struggle, not because they don't care, but because we're growing our own muscles.
Yeah, I was going to say that for me, it evokes a sort of a typical training montage in a video where, the process of moving from unskilled to skilled, it's not a necessarily easy one, and you can pull from any various movies, but, you got to have a theme song and you got to go struggle through it.
Well, I'm actually proud of myself in a very limited way with the guitar now. I can now close my eyes, not look at my fingers, and play what I want.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that was a breakthrough a couple of months ago. And I went, I'd always dreamed of doing this. Now I've got to play elegantly and gracefully and with expression. But the technique, it's like my instrument can respond more easily now. I was fumbling away and trying to figure out, what fret do I put my finger on and all of that. And I was trying to play it with my mind.
Yeah.
Not with my heart and soul.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, God, man. So here we go back to a reiteration of the opening statement. This is taken from Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. There is no such thing as occult obedience as usually taught by the occult schools. In the olden days, in the East, the master exacted from his disciple that implicit obedience which actually made the master responsible and placed upon his shoulders the destiny or the karma of the disciple. That condition no longer holds good. I think this is really important
Yeah,
because
this is a huge change because
it's like as a parent, I took on the responsibility for caring and making choices on behalf of my children until they reached a certain age.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I screwed up and something happened to them, on me.
Yeah, I think it also, in the West particularly, illustrates how, and I shared this journey a little bit, is when I first started to get into this sort of esoteric studies in my early 20s, I was looking for that mentor experience where,
Right.
and then realizing that, just for whatever reason, it wasn't going to happen, that things were happening in my life, I was doing different things. But I think that's also why in the West we love collectively, or we seem to gravitate towards cults of personality, is that we're trying to relive this old pattern that isn't serving us anymore.
Well, in the West, particularly going back to a sports analogy, it's the coach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And man, you got a good coach. The coach is everything.
Yeah.
And you call him coach, when he or she is well into their later years and probably can't move around, but they're still coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what we're looking for, mentors and coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Coaches help you develop the skills
Mm-hmm.
to be successful.
Right.
They don't tell you what to do, although they may say, hey, this position requires that you're aware of this and your role in the team is to provide this. But it's up to you to develop your skills and your awareness to play your part, because we all have different parts to play, just if you look at it as a sports team or as a symphony.
Yeah, I think also now, especially with the mobility and the rapid changing of life, life has taken over that role of coach. Because you have, I don't know, even 100 years ago, you might not have moved around. You might have never left your state. Life was different. Now, a person now might have 15, 20 different jobs in the course of a life. So you have all these opportunities to learn from these different situations, which become sort of the master. Almost like playing a video game. You master a level and move on.
Right. So I think it's good to highlight the distinction now between disciples master relationship or teacher guide relationship to student pupil than it is now. So let's just repeat what he said. The master exacted from his disciple that implicit obedience which actually made the master responsible and placed upon his shoulders the destiny or karma of the disciple.
Mm-hmm.
That condition no longer holds good. In the coming age, the guide, the master, is responsible for the offering of opportunity and for the right enunciation of the truth, but for no more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different paradigm.
Yeah, it's like, hey kid, here's an opportunity. You want to go for it?
Mm-hmm.
Your choice.
Yeah,
it's almost I'm right with you.
It's almost, you see the difference between a traditional starting a business and the way that they do it in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So we're gonna here's your, you go start your thing. You kind of, we're not gonna, it would be kind of hands off. We're gonna give you the chance and see what you can make of it.
Because new things come from new minds,
mm-hmm.
and new minds may not have the old wisdom of how to give structure to ideas, but the idea, if you followed an old regime or an old structure, it could stymie the innovation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you see that, and we're not gently tread on things like political things, but you see that in the test of a system, in that the old Soviet system, how they were able to have great technical achievements, but they hit a wall when it came to innovating. They,
Right.
and like whereas like in the West, it took a little bit longer to get up and running, but then once it did, the the
Well,
expansive innovation.
and I traveled extensively inside the old Soviet Union in the 60s, been to most parts of it. And my experience was very similar, that they had perfected the forms of things,
Mm-hmm.
but the soul was missing.
Mm.
And therefore, they couldn't be inspired
Yeah.
for new things. Now, technically, they were great at breaking through. They were great
Mm.
chess players. They could think differently.
Amazing scientists and
The
technicians.
scientists are brilliant. The Russian scientists or the Soviet scientists at that time. And I actually know one who worked. He was East German, and he worked with the Soviets on their space program, and he came up with some amazing discoveries. And they hit the wall, as you said, because when you don't allow the call of life or the light of the soul to enter, the light brings new illumination. And that's what ideas are. They're these celestial seeds of light that enter the atmosphere because they've never been sown and grown on the planet before. And that's the beauty of saying yes, is that, hey, I can bring something to a point of flowering that has never been seen before. And that's what we're witnessing now.
Mm-hmm.
These innovations, people go, wow,
Mm-hmm.
50 years ago, you couldn't even think that was a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's one more very brief paragraph in the section on obedience. The obedience required is obedience to the plan. It is not obedience to the master. The obedience demanded is that of the personality to the soul, as soul knowledge, soul light, and soul control become increasingly potent in the mind and brain reactions of the disciple. So the obedience is to the plan, the divine plan. That doesn't mean it's like a Bible you have to sort of swear to carry out what's written inside of it. The plan is the living dream of the Creator. That it's a field of resonance that contains this imprint. It's a living field, and we're being invited to play in this field and to bring this field into manifestation. It isn't a playbook you're given, and you have to religiously follow and just bring it out. The beauty of playing in the orchestra is that we're given the main theme, and basically the theme for this solar system is love and light and the light of love. Okay, improvise on that. Come up with a whole set of movements, musical movements, that can give birth to the light of love. And the place we start is inside the human heart. And that's why it's said how humanity will cross the threshold and move through this first initiation that we're facing together and break free from the hold of the obedience to matter, the loyalty to matter, is by having that presence of a greater love and that light of love be born in the cave of the human heart. So that's where it reframes obedience. And so what does that do to you when you hear that, Joey?
I mean, I was just thinking that it's a good transition to moving into the concept of free will, because you sort of laid the bedrock for what we're talking about in terms of obedience. It's an invitation, and it's an opportunity to co-create and play this particular song, And I think with free will, I think of all the different ways that you can approach a life. Everything from the sort of the old Greek philosopher who lived in a barrel to to think of sort of the great conquerors. There's so many ways you can play this game of life, but at the same time, it's like, okay, so how many times do we do that before we say, okay, we've sort of done that before? Is there something that we haven't done before? And something that we haven't done before, which I think is with this invitation, is to try this new thing called "Let's All Play Together."
Well, right. And how much longer are we going to sing along with Frank Sinatra, I'll Do It My Way?
Yeah. Right. without ever questioning who is the my, who is like, when
And
you,
who's the way?
yeah,
Well, I am the truth,
the light, and the
and the
way, yeah.
way.
Yeah. So I think that is, in that, because the section on obedience kind of lays that out so beautifully on, it's not just a master taking responsibility for a student and saying, I'm going to train you to basically be, it's like a one-to-one replacement. So that was like, it's training cog B to be the cog B in the system.
Well,
Yeah.
it's saying we're in Jedi warrior training school.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the Jedi warrior already lives inside you.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you develop and reveal that.
It's also, using that analogy, you're training, the difference between, if you just take it from that world. So the difference between a Sith and a Jedi is that a Jedi is an autonomous, free agent, whereas the Sith is someone who follows the rules of the hierarchy.
Well,
in
it's
that
programmed,
yeah.
it's cloned
Mm-hmm.
to reproduce
Yeah.
the orders.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're training autonomous free agents here. But the idea is like once you have that power, what are you going to do with it?
Well, and then what I'm actually saying yes to in my life, I think autonomous free agents is a wonderful description, because when I think of, faced with the Pledge of Allegiance, the oath of loyalty, for me, obedience is a faithful partnership with my soul. It's not a blind following of anyone who dictates to me what I should do or must do. Um, that's not obedience.
Yeah,
That's being coerced into a certain way of actually giving up my own sovereignty.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though from the Pledge of Allegiance in the context of the U.S. is because I think there's an element to Americans where be careful what you wish for. So if you're asking me to pledge allegiance to a system, I'm pledging allegiance a system that has a lot of freedom in it that maybe you're not anticipating. So you're asking me to be an agent of the, if you're asking me to be an agent of this system questions it, and this system has baked in it the right to remove the top if it's not participating.
Right. And therefore, if
Yeah.
it starts to constrict, then people say, just a minute. Freedom, and the people who are doing the constricting may say, no, but we control the freedom now. It's the freedom to believe in what we believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting one because there's that thing that happens in like comic books and comic movies. It's like where the protagonist is. They say you're locked in the room with us. He's like, no, you're locked in the room with me.
Exactly. Well, and I know we're sort of alluding to different nations, but if you were to take Russia and America as two examples, both of them happen to have, and we've named this in a podcast a couple of years ago, each soul, each personality is incarnated on a different ray, one of the 7 rays. The personality ray for both the USA and Russia is the 6th ray of idealism and devotion. Which means you take it seriously, the oath of allegiance. The flag, you salute, you take it seriously. And you devote yourself to a higher ideal. Now, when it's in its immature or shadow aspect, it is thou shalt salute, that you shall believe in this, and it becomes dogmatic and fanatical, and therefore you can have the belief police, or whatever it is, enforcing something against the free will, which actually, as you pointed out, is the basis for the whole national foundation, the experiment. So if you like, it is a replication of the Syrian law of freedom. And yet anyone who tries to grab power for themselves or their party or a limited religion, belief, or whatever, runs eventually up against the underlying note that says, just a minute. I thought we were here we the people to freely choose. And that's where the tension is at the field at the moment. We're not saying anything's right or wrong, good or bad. It's just we are now facing the tension of what does it mean to be part of a nation where we believe we had the freedom to assemble, free speech.
Yeah.
And yet, if you say something that's quote unquote wrong now, you may find yourself on the other side of a fence.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So we're not making political statements. We're just observing what happens when you got the dialogue between the principle of freedom
Mm-hmm.
and the actual current ability to practice that together.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just point out the whole thing of the sixth ray personality, because it does give you an insight of why it's easier for it to crystallize into dogmatism and fanaticism and the whole word woke, which I still don't understand because it doesn't really mean anything to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that I don't like what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so free will is a conscious choice. And when I choose, I've said yes to something inside of me. And people say, well, if I choose something, then I'm not free to do anything else. Well, no, that's a little conundrum you can lock yourself into. The way I got out of that, and back in the 80s, when I had to really choose, are you going to be present? Are you going to do this? I said, my choice creates focused freedom. Focused freedom is mean I'm doing this, and it's how the whole of my being in the spirit of freedom is focusing itself through this project, through this commitment.
Mm.
It's not saying I'm no longer free.
Mm-hmm.
Like people enter a relationship, oh my God, I'm no longer free. No, you've committed. You've focused your freedom inside this field called a relationship, whether it's a relationship with another person, a religion, a dogma. So that it's really important, the concept of free will. So for me, when I say yes, it's because I freely align with what I sense to be the call of my soul.
Yeah.
And when I freely align with that, my soul is in alignment with the overlighting soul of humanity. So it's as though my will has said yes to a greater will. And therefore, I enter into a much more expanded relationship with life. I don't limit myself by saying yes. In fact, I expand the space of my being.
Mm. It's an interesting analogy too, because we're talking about limits a lot. And one of the things in audio that you learn when you first start to study audio is that to make things louder, you use a limiter. So it's like, okay, so what's a limiter? And a limiter is it's an audio device or it's a digital device that sets literally a limit on how loud something can get. So it's like, okay, well, if it turns it down or it stops it from getting louder. You say, well, how does that make things louder? Well, what it does is that you cap how loud something can get, and then you can bring up the lower things and you create a thicker, louder sound. So instead of a peak being, it's actually much louder throughout the whole sound. And so it's one of those things too where, you when you have design constraints, sometimes you do your best work. You can only use these three things and you have to make this. Well, but then you create something completely new that no one thought of before. And so that's one of the things about the limiting. It's like it's easy to think about in sports terms, which is not everyone's bag of but within the rules of this particular game, now show us what you can do, and that's it's a little different art, because art used to have more constraints, and now art has you can call anything art now, which is also good, but we are seeing some very interesting things happen with people creating outside of the studio system, because it used to have to work within constraints, and those made some very beautiful and incredible movies, especially from the 80s and 90s, and
right.
But I look at some of the stuff that individuals are doing, using AI, and good writing is still good writing.
Yeah.
But very, very interesting things, and
Well, it's as though art has escaped from the frame.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's sort of escaped from the handlers or the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And that's eventually, I think all things come in terms of a cycle. Like we'll go back to what we can actually build, and that's a constraint too. So like it's one thing to imagine something on a screen. It's another thing that something people have to live in. There's safety concerns and there's all these constraints. Like why we don't just build lots of houses on hills. Well,
Right.
because it rains here and they slide down.
And when you look at limits and constraints, it really is geometry.
Mm-hmm.
Things take a certain shape because it's the right proportion mathematically.
Yeah.
So we're about to dive into this section. This is number 58 and ponder on this. It's simply called free will. So we're going to do what we normally do. We're going to read a bit, ponder a bit, chat a bit. This one is taken from Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2. It might be said that within the limits of the intelligent direction of the intelligent person, there is free will as far as activity in the human kingdom is concerned. Where no mind activity is present and where there is no power to discriminate, to analyze, and to choose, there is no free will. Within the vaster processes of the plan, however, as it includes the entire planetary evolution, there is, for the tiny unit of the human being, no free will. He is subject, for instance, to what we call acts of God. And before this, he is helpless. He has no choice and no escape. Herein lies a hint upon the working of karma in the human kingdom. Karma and intelligent responsibility are inextricably woven and interwoven. Whoa, so what's that telling us?
That's a heavy hitter. I mean, that's, not to, reiterate it, but like, it's like, you don't get to pick what song is played, but you get to dance however you want,
Well, life already is.
Mm-hmm.
But it is as a promise. It hasn't revealed itself, and we are the agents of revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And the agents of revelation have to say yes to being part of the revealing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the whole thing is based on free will.
Yeah.
So I was pondering on this morning, and I thought, well, what's the whole reason for free will? And then I had this aha. We talked about the ones fracturing themselves in the many and going out on this sort of journey of the prodigal daughter, the prodigal son, the pilgrim. And then the many discover, because they have this call, this homecoming desire in their hearts, and they suddenly realize they're part of something greater. And gradually they wake up to the fact that I'm not alone, and you meet others and you realize, oh, we're not just brothers and sisters, we're actually part of the same greater being. So for me, free will is how the many return home from a state of separation. It's how the fractal acknowledges the whole of which it is a part. And then I thought of what I described at the beginning of the podcast, is that it's said that the light of the sun, Sirius, is at the heart of every atom of our solar system, which means that free will, because Sirius represents free will, the Syrian law of freedom. It's baked into who we are. Therefore, the reason we have to choose and decide for ourselves, because it's the only way that the light within each atom can be released. If it's the light of Sirius at the heart of every atom, or the light of life itself, as embodied by this life called Sirius, it can only be released through free will, free choice. That's you can't coerce somebody into living a life of freedom.
That's a good point.
So that's what I'm thinking. Why in this coming age does it say you're not going to be told what to do? The master's going to encourage you. Your guide's going to say, hey, here's basically where life's headed. You want to be part of it? If you do, we can help you. If you don't, well, it's your call, up to a point. And this is what I want to explore later. But The reason we have to say yes is because the many parts, the only way to regain your wholeness and come back home is to say yes to who you are, which is beyond your understanding of your partialness and your partiality.
Mm. Yeah.
That's why we have the freedom to choose. That's why free will is here, because it's the only way that life can consciously express itself within the freedoms
Mm.
of the principle that lives
Yeah.
at the heart of the sun, Sirius.
Mm.
I know that's sort of gets a little occultly technical, but
Mm-hmm.
but when you look at it that way, well, of course, if you're going to release the light of freedom, you can only do it through free choice.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to align to life, and life is this expression of itself, then we have to have the freedom to say, not just yes to life, but I am not only part of life, I am life. Life lives in me, I live in life. In fact, I wake up each day and I am the incarnated agent on earth of my soul, which is the agent of the revelation of the one life.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets deep pretty quickly, Joey, this
Yeah, it
stuff.
does. Yeah.
So maybe we could take the next paragraph and see what it does.
Okay.
The distinction between the human realm in the three worlds, this is the physical, emotional, and mental, and the other realms in nature is the factor of free will. In the matter of death, this free will has, in the last analysis, a definite relation to the soul. The will of the soul is either consciously or unconsciously followed, where the decision of death is concerned. And this idea carries with it many implications which students would do well to ponder. Now, this is
This is a
another
bit.
little wrinkle thrown in here.
Yeah, this is a particularly challenging passage, actually.
What it says is that if I plant a seed and it germinates and it grows, it has its own life cycle. It'll move through the 4 seasons, but either it's an annual, it's a perennial, or if it's a tree, it'll last for 300 years. Built into its desire to express itself is a cycle of construction, of composition, and decomposition. So there comes a time when, it's time to let go of this particular formal expression of life. Remember, forms are temporal, life is eternal. Therefore, when the soul says, we did what we set out to do this season, even though you may be in a healthy body, it may cut the thread and say, we're going to recycle, and now we're ready to go back into the inner world, harvest everything that we've gathered on earth, and then prepare ourselves to come back again and grow more of who we are in the next season. So in that respect, death is not a disease. It's the completion of a cycle of expression. That's how I see it. Now you can transpose that to the planet, but
Well, for me, that paragraph brought up a slightly different sort of interpretation.
Okay.
It was the way I was seeing it is okay. So when, particularly in some flowers and those types of plants, they can be greatly influenced by the soil composition. So
Yes.
maybe the flowers have a slightly different color to them than if they were in ideal soil, or maybe it's if you're a certain kind of tree and you're planted out here in the Ojai Valley, and you're used to getting a lot of water, you're going to spend most of your existence not maybe being the fully formed thing that you would be if you were in the Midwest where it rains all the time. But I was thinking but the difference with humans is that in that same way that we're influenced by the soil or the soil, we have the opportunity, we can pick up and move.
We can put different nutrients in the soil.
Yeah. So you add that element to and that's where I think where the free will is different than how we think about it. It's like we have this opportunity to, within one lifetime, change our interaction with this place we live in.
So the freedom is to bring forth the promise that lives inside us as individuals, the planet as a living being,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also the freedom to add the necessary nutrients that will support the revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the difference. So
Mm-hmm.
you're growing in the desert. Guess what? Well, let's make the desert green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can do that.
Yes, you can.
Energy follows thought. You can
Mm-hmm.
change the psychological climate of
Yeah.
yourself,
Right.
your community, the
Well,
world.
but you're still, but within that paragraph, that you're still constrained with. It's sort of baked in that all things being equal, this cycle is good for this long.
Right.
There's not much you can do about that, really. So.
Well, yes. But a plant doesn't say, "Oh, I wish I could live longer," or it basically flowers. I watch the roses here come out, and they are perfect, not a blemish on them. 3 days later, they're starting to droop, and a week later, they're dried up.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what happened to the flower? No, the flower was the revelation of beauty. Beauty remains.
Mm.
The form that delivered it
Yeah.
is dying back. The same with the soul. The soul is beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that a lot up here. We have these amazing sort of hum that comes from the bees,
Yeah.
especially when the different groups of things flower. And sometimes you can just sit on the property here and you just hear the symphony of bees, and you realize, okay, so this whole thing is working together. I mean, if the flowers and the bees are showing up for each other. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. The thing we've mentioned before is that the difference between the angelic realm and humans is the angels don't have free will because that's not the experiment, or that's not the part of the process assigned to them. Humans are given free will because we're the microcosm of the macrocosm. Therefore, when we say yes to life wholeheartedly, life is rebuilding itself. It's coming back into wholeness. We're told that the angels delight in doing the will of God
Mm.
or carrying out the divine purpose. That's all they know. You know, they've got the music and they sing their hearts out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's wonderful. They're not deprived of anything because they have joy, because that's all they know is to sing the song of life. We get to choose whether we want to sing the song of life, the song of death, the song of sadness, the song of joy. And we do. We sing all those songs in one lifetime.
Yeah.
And then in the end, we say, but what's the real song? What's the real song of my soul? What's my real signature tune?
Mm-hmm.
And then we seek to sing that one. And that usually is more joyful than those periods where we got the blues
Yeah.
or the funk,
Mm-hmm.
the grand funk. So there's a lot more in this section, some of which we can skip over because it goes into technicalities. But here, this sort of also mirrors what we covered in the obedience. It says the masters of wisdom never, no matter how great the need or important the incentive, infringe upon the divine right of people to take their own decisions, to exert their own free will, and to achieve freedom by fighting for freedom individually, nationally, and internationally. When true freedom covers the earth, we shall see the end of tyranny, politically, religiously, and economically.
Mm.
I am not here referring to modern democracy as a condition which meets the needs, for democracy is at present a philosophy of wishful thinking and an unachieved ideal.
Mm.
I refer to that period which will surely come in which an enlightened people will rule. These people will not tolerate authoritarianism in any political system. They will not accept or permit the rule of any body of men who undertake to tell them what they must believe in order to be saved, or what government they must accept. When the people are told the truth, and when they can freely judge and decide for themselves, we shall see then a much better world. Now, this is written, 70 odd years ago.
Mm. Yeah, maybe more, right?
So that basically shines a light on what's happening now, not making it good or bad, but just saying, look, we're going through this particular period where there are sections of our one humanity who believe that they have the right to dictate
Mm-hmm.
and tell others what to do, and others are submissive and haven't claimed their own sovereignty. There are no victims in the end.
Mm-hmm.
There are just different levels of awareness and different levels of heart opening to compassion and empathy. There is one more paragraph in this fairly short section on free will that, so maybe we go through this and then just sort of do a recap, Joey,
Okay,
of what we've covered, because this is a lot, obedience and free will.
Yeah.
So it talks about the masters of wisdom, and this is taken from the externalization of the hierarchy. The masters of wisdom, because of the divine principle of free will in humanity, cannot foretell how people will act in times of crisis. The masters of wisdom cannot enforce the good way of life against normal human desire. For this good way of action must come from out of the very depths of human thinking and feeling, and must emerge as a free and non-supervised endeavor. The hierarchy or masters of wisdom may not take those possible steps which will prevent men making mistakes, for it is through those mistakes that people learn by the means of evil that good is best, as your great initiate poet has expressed it. So this is why he's saying, look, this is why we don't dive in and say, well, if there's a God, God will intervene now and fix everything. No, we are the gods in the microcosm. We're the fractals of God here to make things right. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like within the sandbox, you have the freedom to muck it up. So,
You do, up to a point. And this, we were talking just before we began broadcasting of how long can you say no?
yeah.
Are the consequences of saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to respond. I have the free will to say, no, I'm not going to be.
That is a question. That's a good question, because how long can you, when something is reaching a point where it wants to grow and expand and it wants to fly, how long can you say, no, you have to stay in the nest, or no, you have to keep doing this thing that we've always done, when that's, that's a good question.
Well, there's different ways of looking at it. One way is to say that, if anyone who's listening now has been in an addictive relationship with substance or people or whatever, you know that those addictions rule until you make a choice to be free from them. And when you have liberated yourself from the thought form that binds you and the emotional attachments, you then release the chemical detachments. And those cells are no longer dependent on the substance that you are addicted to. That means those addicted cells are no longer part of your universe. So where do they go? Well, they go to some sort of recycling place, and they go through a part of lives that can sort of recycle them, upgrade them. It's said that if somebody holds out and says, I'm not going to be part of the calling of the planetary life, the planetary life says, yeah, but I need to have all the atoms of my being, of which you are an important part, along for the ride. And you can only be along for the ride if you say yes to your understanding that you are part of me. And if I refuse to say that, then according to the ageless wisdom teaching, I am then placed somewhere else in another classroom where I can grow, eventually understand that, oh, I am part of this life. And then eventually, through the free will, I can say yes. So you could, in a very sort of distorted way, say, well, free will exists, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Free will exists. Free will is simply when and how you're going to say yes to life, not whether.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
In that regard, because who are you saying yes to? If you're holding out against life, you're holding out against yourself, because you haven't made the connection. I am a fractal of the one life. And the freedom to choose to be part of that is how you come on home
Yeah.
and come out of the cold.
Hmm.
But it's a very tricky thing because nobody can tell you that.
Yeah.
But if you hold out and say, no way, and there are souls, and it's said that if I deny through choice participating in the life of which I am a part, I become what they call in occult parlance a lost soul. And they're said there is an eighth sphere. There's a sphere of lost souls. This is like the filter. This is where you go if you can't say yes to life, and then you are lovingly and karmically placed somewhere where you will eventually flower, because nothing is ever lost. The whole universe is compassionate. Karma is not a punishment. Karma is that act of grace that always ensures that we will be placed in the right place to learn our lessons and eventually to flower. So the whole idea of free will and obedience is it's an opportunity, as you and I have said. It's an invitation and an opportunity to say yes to life, the life that is at the core of our own being, because we are at the core of life. We are the fractals. We are the many of the one. And I know it seems very simplistic, and it could even sound like a dogmatic statement of this is how it is. But it's what I've arrived at so far.
Yeah.
Of in the end, Michael, you've got to say yes to that which already lives inside of you. Why are you denying something that already is? Are you in denial through not saying yes?
Yeah.
But I'm only in denial when I'm not aware of it and consciously choose to do something different. So for me, free will is the grace of the universe to say, I can be a conscious participant in something greater. It's not losing my freedom to be myself. I'm invited to bring myself into a greater expression of itself.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean,
Oof.
how are you handling this whole thing of obedience and free will, Joey?
Well, for me, as someone that has struggled with, with what we now call, and it seems like we change the definitions from day to day, but ADHD or all these kinds of issues, autism, all these things. So for me, like even the idea of obedience, like I think of meditation, like how hard it was for me to learn how to meditate. And here I am, I can't even obey what I want. So how am I learning, learning that obedience to what is coming from me? I have this desire to sit still and be quiet for 10 minutes. And it took a long time to do that. It took a long time to learn how to do that. But what I got from that is sort of the same thing that you get when you decide to do anything difficult, learn to play piano. Sure, you spend a lot of time hitting wrong notes, but if you put in the work and you're obedient to the process or to the plan to learn how to play, then you can create beautiful music. And for me, that's what this kind of boils down to is, you have you're going to just keep having these opportunities to learn to this dance number. Until you do, the record's just going to keep playing.
That's a great way of looking at it. It's like, goes back to the classic, how do I get to Carnegie Hall?
Yeah.
Practice, practice, practice. How do I get to heaven? Or how do I get to being the truth of who I am? Choice, choice, choice.
Yeah.
The application of free will
Yeah.
consciously.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um,
That was a deep subject. It still
Yeah.
is, and it'll live
Yeah.
with us because we are still not totally free. If you look at the Buddha, he would say, we're still chained to the wheel of rebirth because of our addiction to materialism, our addiction to our emotions, our being bound to our beliefs. Doesn't mean you don't have beliefs, but your beliefs are a lens through which you perceive. They're not the fixed opinions of how things are. And so the perspective of the Buddha, we still have a ways to go on the path of liberation, but free will is the agent that can set us free.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Michael. That was a great episode.
Thank you. Sure.
All right. I will see you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.